Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Nicole Jackson. I'm one of the planning team co-chairs for Black Birders Week, and I'm excited for today's discussion talk with our special guest. If you're tuning in, thank you so much for coming. Please share in the comments or chat where you are viewing from. That would be great to see where everybody's viewing from. And then we'll have opportunities to, you'll have an opportunity to share your questions for our special guest today. And hopefully we can get some of those shown on the screen, as well as comments of support and reflection. Those are really good to have. First off, I want to just remind everyone that today is day 4 of Black Birders Week. Our theme is Wings of Justice, Soaring for Change. Today's theme is celebrating rituals, and our focus is mourning as a form of justice. So our special guest today will be talking about their experience in relation to loss and healing through bird watching. So I'm looking forward to, again, hearing their perspective and really just having an opportunity to share more about those intersections and how we can really use nature and birds to help us heal on our journey of connection and even if we experience loss. So with that, I would like to thank our sponsors for this week. National Audubon Society is one of our sponsors, as well as Wild Birds Unlimited, and helping us provide honorariums to our guest speakers and other programs that we have going on in the week, as well as just opportunities to connect and expand our reach and audience and get more Black people outside bird watching, learning about birds through feeding, and educational programs and opportunities within their regions and communities. So with that, our topic today, title of today's talk and reflection discussion is called Wings of Hope, Healing from Loss Through Bird Watching. So our special guest today is Christy Hyman, and I've just had wonderful conversation and lead up to this event today, and I'm really, really excited to dive in. So thank you all for tuning in. I see some coming in from Massachusetts, New Jersey, Georgia. Welcome, welcome. Again, it's so great to have you all. And with that, I will introduce our special guest. Hello, Christy.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
As well. And did I pronounce your last name right? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, you did. You
Awesome.
did.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know previous conversations getting ready for this discussion, there's a lot of layers to what you've experienced and your journey to healing, continued healing, that I feel is really important to incorporate into what we have going on for Black Birders Week, especially with this topic around grief and healing and how we use nature and birds to help us along that journey. So I want to get started with an introduction. If you would like to introduce yourself to the audience, where you're from, what you do, and kind of just anything about Black Birders Week. How did you find out about Black Birders Week?
Yeah, so I'm Christy Hyman, and I'm from a little town called Laurinburg, North Carolina, which borders South Carolina. And I'm a number of things. I'm a Renaissance person. I am a historian, a historical geographer, a geoecologist, a birder, a grief worker, and an overall human who is glad for the chances I have with birds. How did I hear about Black Birders Week? Well, I mean, it's kind of Black Birders Week evolved along this extremely difficult struggling of, cataclysmic time. And so, but at that time, I had not experienced my loss yet. So this culminated with what happened with Christian Cooper and with the murder of George Floyd. So my loss didn't happen until maybe, so George Floyd was killed in May,
Yeah.
June, July, August. That's when my son passed. So I knew that Black Birders Week was a thing, but only I was drawn to it based on the controversy with Christian Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
I would return back to it once I found that birds could be a healing space for me in my loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like there's so many people that are actually still finding out about Black Birders Week, which is great, because we still have so much work to do, and knowing that it's had such an impact since 2020 has been uplifting and inspiring, but also still very much flashes that light on the issues that we still have in our community in regards to accessibility, equity, connection to the outdoors, and even those historical elements of exclusion in our community. So it's very, very important that we continue these conversations and really learn about the different perspectives based on the different topics, but also just showing a different lens into how we experience nature connection through birding, through getting out in nature, through various activities. So I want to start with just your relationship with kind of nature and the outdoors. When did that start for you, like to really mean something for you? And how did you kind of use that as a guide for yourself in life?
Yes. So before my loss, I was an outdoorsy person, but it was rooted more in the jobs that I had. I worked for the National Park Service at several sites. So the first site was George Carver National Monument in Diamond, Missouri. Shout out to Curtis Gregory, who was a park ranger there. Also, I worked at Bering Land Bridge, which is located in Nome, Alaska. And I also worked at Homestead National Monument, which is in Nebraska. So when you are a park ranger interpretation, you have to go outside and take people on walks and engage them with the history of the site, the natural elements of the site, and try to get people to have a connection to it and something that ignites their own interest in nature, that history, and those things. So I always had a respect for nature, and I always understood that be having a relationship with nature and having access to even to a yard was not something everybody had. So I raised both my children up going to wildlife management areas, state parks, and we would hike. We never got a chance to camp or get in the canoes and things like that, because this is sad, but I don't know how to swim. I'm 44 and I don't know how to swim. So both my children, though, they did learn to swim. So I'm like, but the adult needs to know. So we never got to do those water-based things, but I always took them out in nature. And so as a child, I was blessed to have parents who were able to get their own house and have a yard. And there's plum trees and pear trees in the yard. So I never took for granted that access was amazing. So back when I was a child, your parents said, get out of this house, go outside and play until the lights come on, because you're making too much noises and it's hot in here and we're trying to cook. So we would go all over the place. That's the type of childhood I had. But it wasn't like this. Like me and my little cousin would be like, we're going to go on a hike and we're going to see how many rocks we can. No, it wasn't like that. It was just like, let's get on the bikes and ride down the dirt road and cross the railroad track like that. So like in my loss, it clicks again, but it clicks way more poignantly. And it's a burning passion and desire. And it's a need like water for me in my bereavement. So I will go for a walk in nature every morning before I start my work day. If I have a job where I can't do stuff like that, then that's not the job I need. And
Right.
so I got to have an hour and a half outside so I can center my mind and so that I can see the wonder that happens right in front of my face. And sometimes you just stumble upon the most unusual things. You're a birder, so you know you
Yep.
stumble upon the most unusual things. And as soon as you get home, you Google,
Yep.
can a frog and a skink be on top of a mushroom? And if so, what kind of mushroom? Stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes, yes. It opens your mind up in so many ways, and like all the questions just come flooding in, and the fascination just stays with you. Yeah, all of that is, I feel like verbatim. Like I would totally do all those things. And yes, to the parents telling me to go play. I have 10 siblings, so my mom was definitely like, go play. She wanted a break frequently. So knowing that, we could just go out, run around the neighborhood. There was the neighborhood parks, and like our neighbors and their kids, like we would just go and like run, like we just run. And we had bikes sometimes there were scooters, jump ropes, all of that, like just being out until, yeah, the lights came on. It was time to eat or, get ready for dinner. You'd be back in the house and settled in. So I have vivid memories of that growing up. And then I was very much the one who was, spend hours outside looking at caterpillars and different leaves and like trying to grow seeds, and water them and like find a little like spot to grow for them to grow so my siblings wouldn't like trample them. So yeah, it was it was a fun and interesting experience for me to be out in nature in that way, especially in the city, because the imagination of it was a big part of it too. Just imagining yourself being in different places, and the stories and the characters, and all of that came into play. So yeah, I very much agree also with like not knowing things that you feel like you should know, but you just, like you're talking about swimming, and like I never learned how to swim. I mean, I don't mind getting in water, but like I guess properly swimming, that's not something I've ever learned. But I definitely want to. And to hear that you're passing that motivation on to your kids to do for themselves is just as motivating. So it's good to know that you wanted your children to learn that skill. So with that, I just want to mention to everyone this discussion is about loss and grief. So I just want to make sure that if this is something that's hard for you to listen to, it's okay to take a beat, step away, come back, whatever you need to do for yourself, and then just have an opportunity to really listen and absorb what Christy will be sharing. But it is okay to feel all the things, and to acknowledge your feelings shows that you love yourself and that you care about someone else's experience in a meaningful way. So with that, I just want to dive in, Christy, with about your experience, and can you kind of give us a background of what you experienced as far as your loss, and how that kind of took a toll?
Absolutely. So I lost my son without warning suddenly during the pandemic, and it it completely broke my soul open. It completely it made me turn almost primal, especially in the raw days of grief. It did the same to my surviving child, my daughter. However, our approaches to healing and grief are vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say for the first 45 days after my son passed away, I could only stay in the bed, look after my cats, and make sure that my daughter got to class, because my son passed August 3rd, campus started August 15th. And so I would take her to class, and then I would come back. I was a PhD student at the time in my final year, so I wasn't in coursework, but I was attempting to write a dissertation. So I've committed to 3 things: getting up, getting Chastity to class, feeding the cats, and then with a 4A of taking a bath and brushing my teeth. But then I would get in the bed and my cat would lay at my feet. Where I was in my apartment at the time in Lincoln, Nebraska, it faced a patio outside. And after my son passed, my daughter and I, we would go to plant nurseries. There was this plant nursery in Lincoln called Campbell's. And we would go to Campbell's. It was the local one. That's why we liked it. We didn't want to go to the big box. We would go to Campbell's and we would spend all the money we had on plants. And we would stay in there for like 3 hours. I wasn't attuned to like what types of plants. The only thing I cared about would it work in the zone that we were in? Because Lincoln, Nebraska is a severe zone. Yeah. So I noticed I was drawn to bright colored flowers, and I also was drawn to flowers that were kind of tubular or vertical. And I was like, I'm gonna hang that one. So I would hang it on the porch, and my cat would watch the porch. So one day, Gimli jumped, and he was so fixed on what was going on outside. And I was like, what is he doing? Because my fear was that there was a neighborhood cat that people allowed to roam out, and they were going to try to fight. So I looked, and what Gimli was focused on was not a neighborhood sparrow, but a ruby-throated hummingbird that was attracted to the salvia plant that I got from Campbell's. It was red. It was a red salvia. And when I looked at the bird, I was shocked because, like I said, Nebraska is in the Great Plains. Some like to say Midwest. The weather is severe. So in my mind, I said, how can that tiny bird come through this place? And that's when I started doing the research on it. When I did the research on it, I found out that ruby-throated hummingbirds come through Lincoln, Nebraska, especially in the fall. And this particular one that I saw was a female. So when I read about the life cycle history of a ruby-throated hummingbird, I felt like we had something in common. And what that did was it made me want even more tubular flowers, and it redirected my mind off of my ruminations and grief. It wasn't some cure, but what it did was it reversed my attention temporarily to something beautiful and pure, thus making me want to research more about it, to the point where I was willing to like buy books and invest in cameras so that I could get really good, really fine details of these birds. So that's kind of how it started. So I got my first good lens, my 600 millimeter. I got that in December of 2020. At that time, it was snow on the ground in Lincoln, Nebraska. That didn't stop me. My birthday was December the 15th, and I went out to Marsh Wren wetlands in Lincoln, Nebraska. Lincoln might seem like, it's just a flyover town or whatever. It actually has tons of places to bird. It's actually outstanding. I actually can get more birds in Lincoln, Nebraska than I ever could in Starkville, Mississippi, even though Mississippi is like in the middle of numerous exotic flowers. But anyway, so I went to Marsh Wren, in Lincoln, and I saw hawks. I saw hawks, and I saw, at the time, I just like, oh, look at the little bird, but it was a house sparrow,
Right.
because they could fly anything. And that's what started. So my birding then became birding plus photography plus the optics needed to have the most optimal photographs.
Right. Wow, that's beautiful. I feel like, so just that one experience, like you explaining what that, like the domino effect of you watching your cat and the cat is looking at the flower and the flower is attracting this hummingbird. Like, do you feel in that, I guess looking back, do you feel like that's something your body was longing for?
Yes, it was something my body was longing for, because even though I was broken apart and almost partially like insane after my
Mhm.
son passed, it was something in me that said, listen to Buddhist speakers, listen to survivors of various death events of family
Mhm.
members, and meditation. And part of, because what I was trying to understand was what was drawing me to plants so hard.
Yeah.
And because I had never been into plants like that. My son actually was, but when you're a single mother, I divorced in 2008. When you're a single mother of two children,
Mhm.
that's just another expense. So I didn't get into plants, but I was trying to gather all these different ways that people coped.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was, shout out to any atheists, y'all cool with me, but I was praying to God. I was praying, and I was just like, show me something, anything. And I feel like within a week, that's when we saw that ruby throat.
Mhm. Wow. And that's making me think more of, yeah, like the longing, but also the connection back to your son, and that being kind of like the catalyst for him to show you that you can start healing, because
Yes.
of his interest. Wow, that's powerful. Oh, so I'm very much that person who feels all the things all the time. So I might need to take a minute or two, before getting into the next question. And again, this is, very important. So I want to nurture, the conversation that we're having very much so. So, next question I want to ask, when did you start to notice, the impact of this connection with plants and birds, on your mental health and well-being, and, being able to use it as a healing tool for your grief journey?
So when I started noticing it was when I had an extremely difficult day. Numerous uh, bad luck type things were happening in that same day, and I was literally in my final semester of PhD study, so this would have been spring 2022, and I said, I got a notch of gas in my car. It will get me from where I live
Mhm.
out to, because these places are on the outskirts of the
Yep.
city.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
said, it'll get me there and it'll get me back. And so I went out there and I saw an American kestrel. I've got some good photos with the American kestrel.
Mhm.
And then I did some walking, walked down the hill, walked up the hill. When I walked back up the hill, I noticed a bunch of American white pelicans, and it was really good sunlight.
Mhm.
So I was like, I need to get these. This is how scatterbrained an academic is, but also add academic to birder, and it's super
Mhm.
scatterbrained. I jumped out the car, the engine was running, the door was open, got all those wonderful pics, and then the wind blew and it shut the door of my car.
Oh my goodness.
So now I was locked out of
Uh-oh.
my car in the middle of nowhere, outskirts, Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a place called
Wow.
Denton. And the wind was blowing, and in my head, I just started laughing because I said I'm about to do something really, really crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it brought me back to a memory of my son, actually, because he used to be obsessed with rock geodes.
Uh-huh.
Because what I noticed is my son would just go outside and find the biggest rock he would find, and then he'd say, "Grandpa, can I have your hammer?" And my dad would give him the hammer, and he'd go and try to bust them open so he could see the contents of the rocks.
Yeah.
So what we did, we started buying him geodes so that he would have like something that he's not potentially hurting himself or damaging property. So I picked up the giant rock I saw, and I busted my own window open so that I could get back in my car and get back where I need to be, because there were several things that I needed to do. And I didn't have phone reception. And the nearest neighbor, after you pass the little gun place where people do the trap and ski club stuff, I thought, this isn't safe. Yeah. So I said, let me go ahead and bust open this window and get on about my business. And then, when I get paid, repair the window. So yeah, that's when I noticed that I was getting better, because the old me would have been stressed out, probably would have started, walking and begging people for mercy and just not safe stuff. Yeah. So I could tell that my mind was starting to function better, albeit still very absent-minded. But it was functioning better, and the progression of thought did not linger in the anxiety.
You mentioned earlier in your introduction your daughter and experiencing grief differently. Would you like to delve into that a little bit more of, I guess, the beginning of your grief journey and how you needed to be able to release all of that?
Absolutely. And it was a major life lesson for me, because when you don't, all you know is we're all in pain, we're all sad, we all miss our person. And what I was doing at first, because I found that creating rituals and forms of legacy, it made me feel like a piece of my son's life was still being remembered by these acts of rituals. So there were a ton of rituals I would do on a daily basis. I kept candles on an altar. I had a portrait of him on the altar. I had all these inspirational like words and stuff. I had some of his woodwork and some of his Legos that he made, some of the figures. I had all that stuff on the mantle of this altar. And every day I would get up and I would have a conversation with Ricky, like, I woke up another day, let's try to make it happen. That's, little small stuff like that. But my daughter didn't do any of that stuff. She more so, where I retreated away from human beings, I literally was like, don't human beings. I mean, you have to work with them. You have to, act in service to your community, but there are ways to do that without having to actually be around people. And so my daughter was the opposite. She yearned for places to create new forms of joy, friends, things happening, the music that she was into, her artwork. She thrived off connecting with people. And mine was the opposite. Mine was zero people, all birds and plants, and the ways that I make my ritual. Because as I started to understand, I'm the mother. Right. Chastity is the sister. My mother is the grandmother. My father is the grandfather. The way that your relation was to the person who you lose, it colors the way that you see how you can rebuild after they pass. So once I started understanding that more, I was less confused about why my ideas for ritual and commemoration weren't always met with enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because of the mode of relation that they had with Ricky, but also the ways that they sought to heal themselves. For instance, my
Mm-hmm.
mother, she turned, I mean, she always loved animals, but after my son passed, her relationship with her dog Lucky, who my son also loved, and then Brownie, it was just such a it she threw herself into caring for the dog in such a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
And when he passed, you know, it's it's like my mother was experiencing the grief of Ricky plus the dog
Yeah.
on top, because she was less accessible after the dog than she was with my son, even though my son was a human. But I
Yeah.
realized that what my mother had done was she had kind of blocked it out and was able to kind of, I don't know, maybe transform
Mm-hmm.
her love for Ricky, put it into the memory she had of Ricky and Brownie, and it became something that really was a healing point for her. So when
Mm-hmm.
he finally did pass, he passed in 2022. I felt like my mother, the onslaught of grief like hit her double
Yeah.
when that happened. So it's one of those things where it's very, very delicate. It's very, very delicate. And people are very tender about these things. And so what I learned was I did not need to mandate the way my daughter grieved, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't need to make her do these
Right.
things, because ritual was my thing, but her thing was her thing in the
Mm-hmm.
way she decided to do it. So this past February, she actually designed the Converse shoe for Black History Month, which
Mm-hmm.
they call Black Joy. It was a limited
Mm-hmm.
edition sneaker.
That's
And
beautiful.
on the front is a likeness of my son, her brother.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, I know how to draw. I'm not trained like my daughter is, but like
Yeah.
we all three of us, my son and my daughter, we just have the drawing gene. And
Mm-hmm.
so I couldn't imagine trying to create a portrait of Ricky. Like that would be too hard for me.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine writing a song about Ricky. That would be too hard for me. But I feel like my daughter, being a practicing creative,
Mm-hmm.
those are safe spaces for
Yeah.
her to see her grief.
Wow. Yeah, and I love how you are sharing like the different perspectives of your family members and how they chose to work through their healing. But also thinking about that as a whole, and like we all don't have the same relationships to one another, like
Mhm.
experiences. So, and I thought about that too in terms of my mom raising 11 children on her own, but also thinking about our different ages and how we experience my mother, like at different times in our life. I'm not going to have the same experience as, one of my younger siblings as I would with an older sibling. So really putting that in perspective of you really have a different relationship with each person in your family based off, those experiences. And yeah, they're going to receive it in a different way and need to heal in a different way. And I feel like that needs to be talked about more too, of just like, what does that look like? What does it mean? And how to kind of find ways to come back to each other through those different forms of healing. Because, we really have to find, so we talk about a lot with birding, find our flock, but also just ways to share the grief without it becoming more dark, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But just, yeah, helping each other find that light, so you can rebuild, because obviously things are not going to be the same. You're not going to have the same connections and relationships from experiencing that loss, but it does help you better reflect and see how to rebuild or re-strengthen that relationship that you have with family. And I remember, and I'm just thinking about my own personal experience in losing my father after he passed. I actually just went to work. I shouldn't have gone, but like that was, I didn't want to be by myself. I knew enough about myself to know, like, if I have just experienced this tragic loss, but also thinking about being by myself and like trying to make sense, like I thought it was just, be this negative spiral. So I needed to be around people, even though I'm very much introverted. I needed to be around people to block out that noise of despair and just negative thoughts and all of the sadness, because it was very extreme sadness. And then there was moments where I would just see him. Like I would just be out and I would see him and not see him, but like people that looked like him. So that was just bombarding me. So it was just like finding, like you were talking about, rituals to like kind of recenter myself in a way where I can acknowledge the grief and embrace it, but also know that there's not like a finite, like it doesn't stop at a certain point of like, okay, your grief is done, but like it happens in waves and throughout your life. So I had to learn, pretty quickly that as much as you want it to just disappear and go away and like, oh, I don't want to feel this. This is the worst. Like it's all consuming. That's not how life presents it. It's just like you're really working on the healing journey bit by bit. So thank you for giving us a little bit of a background of your experience and how that's impacted you. And I want to go into, I guess, thinking about the process and the grieving and community. Was there community for you during your grief journey, or at least the start of your grief journey? And was it hard to share with other people what you needed to heal?
It was hard, and it because my family was so we were all located in different states, at the time, and I'm very close to my parents, but I'm not terribly close to my older siblings. I have 3 older siblings, and then I have another older sibling who some would call the knee baby. So the almost last child, Lawrence, he's nonverbal autistic. So of course, because he's nonverbal autistic, he can sense things, but ultimately he can't vocally communicate his thoughts. So of course, with Lawrence, he just noticed that it was the one less person was coming home, and he didn't know where he was. But with my 3 older siblings, I wasn't very close to them. And so with grief, it can amplify whatever limitations a family resource has in terms of emotional capacity. So a lot of my support actually came from my friends, some of whom met Ricky and some who never did. But these were people who I had developed friendships based on our mutual interest in various types of scholarship.
Right.
So basically fellow historians, a few fellow geographers. They came through, and I was off social media probably for the 60 days following my son's passing, but I did update my blog so people wouldn't be afraid that I died or something. But when I did come back, I had noticed that if I ran what they call a search, an indexed search for types of grief, so child loss, it would bring up tweets about that,
Yeah.
And it will also invite you into the worlds of people experiencing that. And so I developed kind of an affinity for the grief community online on Twitter. At this time, this was before Twitter became X.
Yeah.
So it was a bit more moderated. Twitter's always been kind of the wild, wild west, but it's not like it's not like it is now, where if you say Black Birders Week, somebody's going to say nudes and bio.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like that then.
Mm-hmm.
So you could easily find people to connect with going through what you were going through.
Mm-hmm.
So it was those people, but like I said, there was something in me that really became very critical of the human race, and with my loss, because I started to notice things about my fellow grievers, like they couldn't take a day off after their child passed. They had a job where they couldn't take the 3 days off. And that's just like, why are they doing this to people? Oh, because they want you to extract all of your energy so you can keep working. So we're going to pretend that bereavement is just a 3-day thing, and then you're back in the saddle. Wow. So I became very critical of those structures that impede people's ability to heal. And I became way more forgiving of people online who some might say overshare, TMI, or always talking about this, or always talking about that. Well, sometimes that's the only place they can go.
Yep.
So I found that in the evolution of me being more expansive and understanding that everybody isn't going to grieve like me, it also made me less expectant of what people were willing to do.
Yeah.
Even though I knew they couldn't necessarily cope with hearing very sad and profoundly unbearable loss, I did find that some people were wired for solutions. So, well, Christy, if you ever need somewhere to live, or if you're coming through such and such, you can stay in my house. So if you want to come camping with us, come camp. So it's like people were doing things. They knew they couldn't solve my problem, but they were trying to say they knew I wasn't really creating community in this state. I was just doing what I needed to do to get my dissertation done, doing what I needed to do to feed myself and my daughter and keep the household. So I kind of bagged back from people, but I never felt afraid to ask for help. I never felt afraid to ask for help. And I would say that the summer before I started my first tenure track job, which was in Mississippi, that was probably the most difficult financial situation I've ever experienced in recent memory, because you lose the money that you were getting as a graduate assistantship. That's gone. And you have a job, but you won't get your first paycheck until like September 15th or something. So, and I was working like 3 contracts at the time, but contractual pay doesn't always happen at the rate you want it to happen. So like I was on a contract with the Wilderness Society, and I have a great relationship with them. And one of the person who I worked with, Jill, it was the second anniversary of my son's passing. So it was August 3rd, 2022. And it was important for me to go to the Great Dismal Swamp and be in community with the descendant ceremony. It was the first ancestors ceremony put on by the descendants of the Great Dismal Swamp, indigenous people and enslaved Maroons. And I knew I had to go there, but I didn't have the financial resources to get there at all. And I was telling Jill about it, and I was like, I need to be there. I need to be there with my friend Eric Shepard. I need to be there as I deal with this unbearable remembrance. And I was like, can you help?
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked, can you help? It was this kind of, can you give me a hotel? Can you give some gas money? And she did. And I said, I will pay you back as soon as I get my first check. And I did. But the old me, too embarrassing. Too embarrassing.
Wow. Even connection to history. You mentioned being a historian. So before I even ask that question, I kind of want to go back to what you were saying about you use the word attempting to complete your dissertation or your PhD. And even connecting it to society's, pressures to like produce and like just be doing all the things all the time with no breaks and no rest. Um, how did that go for you? Like, was there a point where you're like, you know what, I don't care about this anymore, I'm grieving? Or was there, a push to still be able to, I guess, do it and simultaneously go through your grief journey, but also still be able to accomplish your goals? What was that struggle like for you?
It was very, very, it was very, very difficult. It was difficult on several fronts. On the first front, it was grief literally breaks your brain. It breaks your brain. It affects your ability to focus. It affects your ability to like remember things. It even affects like your walking ability and your ability to steady yourself. It does a number on your brain. And it got to the point where the only thing that I could write with authority in was about grief. If it wasn't about grief, it's like I forgot everything I knew. There's this episode of SpongeBob where he forgets to put the pickle on the Krabby Patty, and this guy says, "You didn't put the pickle on the Krabby Patty," and he's like, "I don't know how to do my life anymore." And he literally forgets how to make a Krabby Patty. Well, the grief, it makes you not trust your own voice in terms of things that are that come from like your intellectual centers. And so what I found myself doing was reading. I was like rereading everything. Like you go through the comprehensive exams, I was rereading all my notes. I was rereading everything, and I would read something, and then I said, okay, summarize it. Read it, summarize it. And so like I was literally trying to get my brain back into thinking scholarly. And what I realized was that the better I felt, so if I felt some semblance of hope in the day, it would allow me to work in spurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the last semester of my graduate study, when I was writing my dissertation, I actually left Lincoln, Nebraska on December 31st, 2021, and drove to Tucson, Arizona, where the weather would not be snowy and where I could be outside without freezing to pieces. And I was there until March 5th. I didn't have money like that to afford that, but I scrounged it up from somewhere, and I paid for this room in somebody's house and stayed there. And the whole time I was birding. And I would bird for like 3 hours because you know all about Tucson. It's the best place to bird.
Yeah.
It's one of the best places to bird. And the outlying places from Tucson, you got Patagonia, you got Portal, I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm seeing all these new birds that I've never heard of. And so I'm having to go on eBird and, okay, what's this bird? Okay, Vermilion flycatcher. Okay, this bird. Flicker. And so that allowed me to finish and pound it out, as they say. I pounded it out there. I could get my 4 hours of birding in, beautiful sunshine, and then I could sit at the desk. It's like, you've experienced beauty. You've rewarded yourself before you've done the work. Now do the work.
Wow. What conversations were you having in nature about your grief? Whether out loud or in your head, what did that look like for you? Or
In the
yeah,
beginning,
how does
it,
that, I guess, pan out to like, I don't know if this makes sense, but like I talk to
oh, it
myself a
makes
lot in
sense.
nature. So I'm like,
Oh yeah, I was definitely
yeah.
talking to myself. Like as soon as I got in the car, I
Mhm.
just I just be thankful. I say a prayer of thanks. But on the days that my grief was particularly heavy,
Mm.
it would just I would see the beauty, and then I just be moved to tears, and then I would give way to that oscillation of grief, and I give way to the tears that had been numbed or put away or distracted from.
Mhm.
And that cathartic wail, that cry, it does something. It like gives you a little bit of energy afterwards.
Mhm.
And it's like that burden, that strange weighing down of grief that you're not properly addressing, it goes. So it was a place to cry
Mhm.
because, like I said, at that time, my daughter and I were in the same dwelling, and your child, your adult college attending child is hearing your mom weep all day. It's so I would go to the wilderness to cry. And then I'd be crying, and the next thing you know, I see some kind of bird, and then I grab my camera and it's like, take the picture.
Yeah.
And instantly your mind just gets jolted to trying to take a picture of the bird, trying to see what kind of bird it is, trying to understand the vegetation it's on, trying to understand the call they made,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
season that you're in, and if they're seen as supposed to be there or are they not supposed to be there.
Mm. What did your experiences in nature and with birding, what did that remind you of your son?
It was kind of a lot. It was kind of everything because
Mhm.
he always loved birds. And he would sit out on the balcony in Lincoln, and I think it was a robin, but he's like, Mom, that bird keeps following me. And I just laugh about it. But like he would pay attention to it. And
Mhm.
when he would walk home from school, from middle school, he would see how far he could get with squirrels. And he liked to feel like the squirrel trusted him. And
Mhm.
so, and then he would stop what he was doing to relocate earthworms if the
Mhm.
sun suddenly came out so they wouldn't dry out.
Yeah.
And he loves stick bugs. So
Mhm.
whenever I would go out and see any of those things, I
Yeah.
would see them as like a representation of my son's spirit. And there were certain birds that I would just keep seeing over and over, but in different states because I drove overland whenever I would go back and forth to my research area, which was
Mhm.
the Great Dismal Swamp of Virginia, North Carolina borderlands. So I would be driving from Lincoln to Virginia, and I keep seeing the red-headed woodpecker everywhere I stop. I see it in Indiana, I see it in Tennessee, then I see it in North Carolina, see it in Mississippi. And I would think to myself, Ricky must like this bird because I keep seeing it. So I will take pictures of it. So
Mhm.
I see a red-headed woodpecker, a belted kingfisher, American robin, northern mockingbird. I see those as Ricky's birds.
Mhm. I'm kind of laughing from what he said of this bird's always following me, and you have your own version of that now. I love that. I want to get into a little bit about um, healing and grief from society's perspective, and even thinking about the Black community and how we don't have enough of these conversations around tools that we can use to heal through grief. And kind of want to get your perspective on how you feel about um, how society, I guess, deals or doesn't deal with grief in a way that can be helpful or nurturing um, for you or for anyone that might be going through something similar.
Yeah, it's interesting because, grief is a very universal experience, but the main discourses that talk about it are in religious contexts, so religious institutions and things, but yet the government is considered secular for the most part, maybe civil religion of sorts, but these things create a mixed bag of expectations for people. So you have this secular thing that says, yes, it's bad when people die. Let's give you 3 days, but you got to come back to work. And also, you've changed a lot. Don't bore your friends, or don't be a drag. You're being a drag, bringing up your dead person again. And then you have religious authorities who have ideas about death, the way people die, the age at which people die. All of these things, there are these pronouncements about it sometimes, depending on the religious authority you might subscribe to, or you may not subscribe to one at all. But it's in these contexts that death is addressed. It is facile approach as it is, because you don't know how horrible profound loss is until it happens to you. And if you have social messaging acting like everything in life can be solved, or the general belief that there's always going to be hope, the good will always happen, the bad will always be trampled, and it will always be good. Well, the grievers know that it won't always be good. The grievers know that there's sometimes not a happy ending. And that's a disruption. That's a disruption to the world moving at the pace that it moves. So grievers become disruptive if they show their grief too much, too often. So you have some people, I know of grievers who are, church-going people who said they had to change churches because the pastor told them, why are you still grieving? You're not trusting in God hard enough. That kind of stuff. Even though in the Bible, there's so many people who lost children, lost parents, lost whole civilizations in all types of massacres. So you have it right there in one of the main books for Christianity, yet even religion sometimes is a way to order society so that it can function. So, if I recall David's story, even it says something like he cried for 7 days and 7 nights. He tore his clothes. And then there's like this epiphany, and it kind of gives that small message that there's a fixed time for grief. And if you are beyond that fixed time, something's the matter with you. Because number one, death awareness in Western countries is so little understood, or something seen to prescribe for, meaning if you take a medication for this, it should alleviate this, which doesn't work like that. I have proof of that. Grief is a condition that does not go away. But if you have a society that wants you to function so that you can clock in and clock out after 8 hours, then you have to try to minimize it or hide it in some way. So I think for Black people in particular, since, I don't like to throw out this generalization, but coming from North Carolina in the United States, overwhelmingly Black people subscribe to some type of religion. And so that in and of itself is this thing where, well, get in your Bible. You're not getting in your Bible hard enough, because as historically, Black people have encountered 1,000 deaths in their lifetime, especially during enslavement. Children getting taken from mothers on the mother's breast, the father being taken to another plantation or never seen again, or worse. It's trauma over and over again. Yet they still had to go out in the field and pick cotton or cultivate rice for 16 hours. They couldn't grieve. They couldn't grieve. So how
And
much is this
it's
in our
another
genetic
form of
memory?
loss.
Exactly. This is in our genetic memory. And so and that's what makes grief and mourning and ritual a form of justice, because you're saying, no, I'm hurting. This is a cataclysmic jolt to my soul. I will attend to this. And no one's going to make me feel bad for attending to this. In the ways that I try to attend to this, I'm going to try to make them as healthy as possible. But for the most part, I'm doing what I need to do to stay alive.
Yes, 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 yes. I'm feeling all of it, feeling all of those words you're saying. And that's why a lot of it, we just need like to get to the root of it. It's like the word radical means root. And thinking about like what is actually happening, the realities. And when it comes to grief and loss, we have so many versions of that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and we don't allow ourselves or give ourselves permission to take a breath, because it feels like we're holding our breath the whole time. At least that's how I feel. I just feel like I can't catch my breath. I'm losing my breath, like, and I just want to feel that release enough to be able to say, you know what you're dealing with, what you're going through is real, and that it means something, and it will continue to mean something. So I think having that understanding of the importance of mourning and grieving, and that it's not temporary and it's forever journey until you take your last breath, like it's so emotional, it's so raw. But then connecting it to what you're saying about the purpose of healing, the purpose of connection within that grief, really gives you an opportunity to heal, in a real honest, truthful way. It doesn't, you're not like sugarcoating it. It's just, this is what it is. And I'm going to take it one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. But that's what we need. And I feel like nature connection is a version of a healing journey. So for you, and thinking about nature connection and thinking about society, do you feel like it's increasing in use as a healing tool, or do you feel like there's still a ways to go with including that into options for people that are going through loss?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pick on my friend Melissa Stuckey, at University of South Carolina. I saw her tweet something one day, and she was outside doing something, and some bees came out, and she said, "See, this is why I don't go outside." And I mean, when you and I know another colleague of mine, Jordan Linton, who I met when I was in Mississippi, and she hated going outdoors. And like I would just regale her with all these interesting things about me seeing alligators and seeing interesting mushrooms and seeing birds and families of birds. And she was like, "It's hot out there." So it's just so I think I feel like we have to, as a society, develop ecological imagination and eco-literacy. And the first thing that comes with that is building a relationship with nature beyond just recreating and beyond just, sports person type, activities. We need to understand the intrinsic value of it in order for us to really see it as something that could be a refuge. So I think that depending on one's demographic and depending on the type of space they grew up in, they're more or less comfortable with, kind of, primitive type hiking trails and dry cabins and what to do, what to eat, or what to put on yourself to deter mosquitoes, or understanding that there is a possibility that you might see a bear, but you have bear spray, or you can just lie perfectly still and hope for the best. But still, just the awesome wonder of nature outweighs those types of 1 in 1,000 hazards. But I think it needs to be something we teach in school so that it can be a universal knowledge that this even exists for people. If you grow up in an urban society that devalues things that are in common, like the beautiful trees in the park, or if the way that a yard is supposed to look is just supposed to be a few shrubs that are shaped like rectangles or squares in turf. Turf is good because that's how children can play soccer. That's how dogs can run around. But also, biodiversity of vegetation in a yard and pollinator gardens are good too. So maybe make room for all of it. And then people can understand the healing part of nature once they see it as part of their mosaic of life. They're not separate from it. They're not separate from it. When I recounted my raw grief story, I talked about the primality of the whale. And like literally my body was doing things that were involuntary. It was this strange feel, and I did feel like an animal. And I think that when we say things like they act like an animal, and it's especially people who have been stereotyped as animals, like for instance, Black people, there's a stereotype they're really monkeys, and that's racist as hell. But so we see ourselves as being so separate from animals, but they've embedded something bad about animals to devalue a certain human demographic, but there's nothing more noble than trying to survive and living on your instinct like an animal. Animals take good care of their children. Animals take care of their habitat. So why am I so against being in community with them as a fellow being? Right. And I think it's not just animals, it's trees, it's lichen, it's moss. This is something that's rooted in indigenous knowledge, but they have it right. We are stewards of this world, and we need to treat it like we care about it, like we care about it as much as we care about our own children and our own parents and our loved ones.
And we need it. We definitely need, it's a life force. It's keeping us alive. I don't know why that's not just as important of just the fact that trees give us oxygen. Yeah, like it's that basic, but it's that, like you were saying, like the beauty of it, like when you really start to peel back the layers, the connections, the nature doesn't expect anything from us. And it's so honest at the same time of like, y'all really need to get y'all stuff together. If you want to remain, on this planet. So like, I just think that speaks volumes of just knowing how important we really need to circle back to the connections, and the cycles and the ritual. Like we see that in nature, the rituals, the cycles, the seasons changing like all the time. And a lot of these processes that nature is experiencing, like it's can be really brutal, but comes out on the other end and just like, okay, we got through it, let's keep moving forward. And the resilience and the adaptability, like all of the, like so many life lessons that I learned from nature that I'm just like always just mind blown of, not necessarily needing to be in a classroom and like reading a book, but just the experience of seeing nature and experiencing nurturing from nature. It's beautiful. This is really beautiful. So we are, oh my goodness, I could talk to you for like another 2 hours. I always just want to like, I should like do like a talk show or something. But I mean, we're not at time, but you know, I have to wrap this up. So I guess, you know, that's fine. I just want to say to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. This is like, I'm learning so much, you know, from our previous conversations still, but even just now of you sharing, and I'm thinking about things so differently, and like just having more time to reflect on our experiences, and how I want to just, yeah, have more of a support system. And, you know, as I think about May as being mental health wellness month, but also thinking about loss, whether it be through our human, you know, relationships, connections, but also our connection to nature and the outdoors and what that means. Because we're still experiencing a lot of it in the natural world. And that's grief too, you know, and we might not have the words for it, but it's happening. It's showing up in our body. It's showing up in our emotions. And we need to find better ways to be able to release that. And nature is a place to do that, to release that. So I want to share before we wrap up. You have a few things in terms of people wanting to connect with you and learn more about your work. And then just, yeah, go along with you on this journey. I have a few things to share, and you can give kind of a little explanation for each. You do have a Twitter, Twitter account. So I'm going to put that on the screen for anyone that's interested in getting that information. And then we'll share a little bit about your blogs. So this is the Twitter handle, if anyone's interested in connecting. Are you on Twitter a lot? Is that your main form of social media engagement?
Yes, I'm on Twitter quite a lot. I tweet a lot. Some people like, you tweet too much. But yeah, I tweet about academic announcements, grief, and birds. Okay. And sometimes very random replies to things.
Next is your bird blog. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, so this is like the primary place where I share my amazing bird photography. I am a novice photographer, but because I'm so hyper focused on it, a lot of them come out pretty good. So that's where you can go mostly to see my catalog of bird pictures, and people can use them if they want to, just, you know, credit the blog.
Awesome. Next is your podcast blog. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the podcast came about when I was getting my geography PhD, and somebody said, "Oh, well, people, they weren't talking to me. They were talking to somebody else." And they were like, "Geographers, of course they go outside." And someone was like, "No, some of us just look at data all day, or some of us do qualitative data is just interviews. We don't necessarily have to immerse ourselves out and like off the grid." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I wanted to know, I was trying to understand which disciplines, which specialties seem to attract people who do like outdoors. And for those who don't, what is your experiences, and how did that allow you to feel like you'd rather be in an urban or indoor space?
Okay. Thank you for that background. And then lastly, we have your academic grief and randomness blog.
Oh, yes. So that's another site of announcements, but also places where people can follow my academic adventures and, you know, look at my CV and see if, you know, I might be somebody that want to do a workshop, stuff like that. I also talk about grief on there. And what I'm trying to do with this is show that academics are not these automatons. They actually have a multidimensional self. So that's why I include all those things, because it's like, we're not just a bunch of automatons that spit facts online and then log off like we're actual human beings.
Yes, and definitely we are not monoliths.
Mm-mm.
So I'm going to show some comments that came in. I'm going to go back to a comment earlier. You were talking about the swimming. And this was a comment from one of the viewers, Dara. And yeah, we have to think about that in terms of not having the opportunity to swim, even if you were interested in learning. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Christy and Nicole. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bird Windsor. And thanks, Dara.
And then lastly, Tama.
Oh, wow, we got a superstar among us.
Yeah, great discussion. Grateful for it. Thank you for tuning in, Tama. And I'm so excited to, just be able to feature these unique conversations. Again, they are very needed, and it just gives a different perspective into how we experience nature and birds in our everyday lives and the connections that we make. And we're human at the end of the day. We are not robots. We are human. So thinking about today, like this has given me, I'm so grateful for you, Christy. I am so sorry for your loss. And I'm sure, like we were talking about it, the grief happens in waves, but the fact that you can share your story in this way and show us that healing is part of the journey speaks volumes. So again, I want to thank you so much for being a part of our Black Birders Week 2024, sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and just for being you. Thank you.
I thank you, and I thank you for being you. And we're gonna stay in touch because there's more music of birds to be made.
Yes, for sure. So with that, thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, it is Wednesday. Our theme is celebrating rituals. So hopefully if you were able to tune in, you've had some time to at least take some notes, jot down some things, reflect. Please share with friends. Please share with family. This is a recording, so you can watch it back, the replay. On YouTube. We have it, I think, on Facebook and Twitter as well. So feel free to watch it back and share with anyone you feel like it would be helpful to. With that, tomorrow is Thursday already. How is it Thursday already tomorrow? Oh my goodness, time. And I will be hosting another conversation about actually crows, family names, and storytelling. So I'm excited for that conversation with Alice Crow. And again, I don't know how I find these people, but like, I'm just interested in all the things, and I'm like making the connections. I'm like, yes, we definitely need to have this as part of our programming. So I'm looking forward to that conversation tomorrow. If you are online, please be sure to, again, use Black Birders Week hashtag to engage with us so we can keep tabs on who's, where and what everybody's doing as far as online and offline events that you're attending or participating in or even leading. I feel like we've seen so many people talking about bird walks and their experiences with that in their community, which is really awesome to see. Will you have any time for birding, Christy, this week?
Oh, yes, I have time for birding. I'm in the city of Worcester, Massachusetts, and there are lots of old trees here, and I think I might even see an owl.
Yay! All right. Well, everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening. I feel like I always have to reference because of the time zones now where everybody is. But stay tuned for more. We also have our giveaways still happening. So feel free to, again, visit our website, www.blackafnstem.com, to get more information on how you can enter for the giveaways. And then, stay online, stay connected, and happy birding, everyone. Thank you all again.